Can everyone see my screen? Okay. Well, thanks again, everybody. This is the So You Want a UX Job in 2021 panel discussion. It's sponsored by Comcast. We're really glad that you're all here. We thank you for joining us and making this event possible. This is the third now annual event in what we've been calling the So You series. This has been an awesome partnership with Phil Charron of Think Company, our star moderator. This began about 2 years ago with the So You Want a UX Job, or So You Want a Job in UX event. We followed that up last year with So You Want to be a successful UX practitioner. And this year we're doing So You Want a UX Job in 2021. So kind of going back to the first year and talking about what specifically do you need to do in the current crazy environment. So I want to talk a little bit about logistics. Note that you'll be muted by default and your video will be off. In the Zoom features, you'll see a chat and a Q&A. Please use chat for general discussion and comments. And if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the panel, please put them in the Q&A. This will make Phil's moderation job a lot easier. You'll also be able to upvote questions and help us see what the most popular questions are. Please do note that this event will be recorded and shared online. It'll be on our YouTube, which will be available in a few days after the event. Also, thank you in advance for your patience as we deal with any potential technical difficulties tonight. So for anyone who's not familiar with PhillyCHI, we are the local chapter of ACM SIG Chi. We are dedicated to UX knowledge sharing, and we organize networking, speaking events for the local UX community. We've been doing this for 15 years. We're dedicated to UX knowledge sharing and community building. We also support a safe and positive environment for everyone to come together and talk UX. So we encourage everyone to read our code of conduct, which is available on phillychi.acm.org. And if you notice any unacceptable behavior tonight, please let a board member know in the chat, or you can reach us at our email. So now I'll pass it over to Remi.
I was muted. Hi, everyone. I am Remi. I am the vice chair for PhillyCHI this year. And we are an organization led by this wonderful board you see here. Most of us are on the call today as well, and you will meet us all throughout the event. I want to go over tonight's schedule really quickly. We're going to start with the welcome and announcement and job time, which we are currently in right now. And then we will go into the panel discussion. And following the panel discussion will be an audience Q&A. And after that, we'll do a little raffle and do a wrap up at the end. So be sure to stick around till the end of the event so you can be here when we announce our raffle winners. And speaking of the raffle, what are we giving away? We're giving away some awesome books from Rosenfeld. So today we have Build Better Products, Why We Fail, and Service Design. So we will select winners at the end of the call, and we will reach out to you guys who won after the event to get your addresses, because we are still sending physical copies of the book. So you will get that in the mail shortly. Tonight is really, really exciting. We are having an after party on Twitter Spaces. Thank you, Reggie from Twitter. So we're really excited to extend the conversation after the event tonight on Twitter Spaces. So you can join us by logging on to Twitter, so you go to Twitter after the event, and it's an audio only Spaces format. So it's similar to Clubhouse, and it will be hosted by Reggie Murphy, who is on tonight's panel, and he is the research lead for the Spaces project. So we're really, really excited to have him here tonight and to have this opportunity. So you can log on to Twitter from your phone, your iOS or Android phone, follow Reggie at Reggie Murphy, and you tap his bubble when it turns purple at the top of the home feed to begin this Spaces event. And now we are going to go into some job time. So for those of you who are joining for the first time, we do something at every event called Job Time, where we connect job seekers with companies that are hiring. And since we are a local chapter, I know there's a lot of you guys from all over the world, which is super exciting, but we are local. So we're going to try to focus on Philadelphia roles. So we're going to start with some people who have companies or job postings up that are hiring. So if you are at a Philly-based company and you have open roles, you can either raise your hand and share. We can unmute you so you can share the open role, or you are free to drop that into the chat to all participants. Is there anybody who would like to share about a role currently? It looks like we have two raised hands.
Gonna mute Megan.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
All right. Hi, everybody. This is Megan. I'm a UX strategist at the City of Philadelphia, and our team is hiring a UX designer. I'll drop the link to the position in the chat, but I wanted to kind of highlight that the application is only open until this Friday. So if you're interested, definitely check it out and apply.
Thank you, Megan. Ben, I think you have to unmute people. I don't think I have that power.
Okay, I just unmuted Abdullahi. Are you there? I think that's not working. I'm going to go to Talia.
Hi, I'm Talia. I work at Hero Digital. We have a bunch of positions open. Some include a presentation designer, a senior copywriter, senior user experience designer, senior visual designer, a UX lead specifically for mobile apps, another senior visual designer, and I think that's about it in these spaces. But I'll go ahead and drop our current openings into the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Talia.
Yeah, thanks, Talia. Sorry for butchering your name there. Teresa, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so I'm a design manager at Think Company and also on the panel tonight. But we have a ton of job postings up right now, a variety of different experience levels and a variety of different roles: content strategists, researchers, UX designers, visual designers, design leads. I think there might even be like a project manager position up right now as well. So I'll drop a link to our general careers page in the chat, and hopefully some of y'all will apply.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Teresa.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else who wants to share a job that is open? If not, we can jump to people who are looking for a job. So if you are looking for a job right now, you can feel free to reach out to everyone who shared tonight if you think it'd be a good fit. And also feel free to share your LinkedIn in the chat just for everyone to see. I'm going to pass it on over to Ben Dolly now.
Hey guys, I'm Benjamin Dolly. I am the other Ben on the board this year, and I am the treasurer for PhillyCHI. It is my honor to give a shout out to our awesome sponsors for tonight. Our annual sponsors are Think Company, and from Think Company, we have on the loan Phil Charron and Theresa Decker tonight, as well as O3 World, Vanguard, and want to give a special thanks to Rosenfeld Media for providing us with the books to raffle off tonight. And a super big thank you to Comcast Experience Design Team, who is the sponsor of tonight's event. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Liz to tell you a little bit more about Comcast.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ben. I'm Liz. I'm Executive Director of User Research at Comcast, which is part of the larger Experience Design organization. There's probably about 200 or so of us in that group. We do everything from video, TV, internet, connected living, Internet of Things. We lots of customer service work. It's some really cool, interesting stuff. Voice control, hardware. We have a lot of open positions as well. I didn't want to jump in, but since I have my turn, I will drop the email address of the person you can reach out to if you're interested in any roles on our team. We have everything from design, interaction design, content. I know we're looking for folks in research, including research manager for the video space. So some exciting stuff going on. And You guys are going to be in great hands tonight with the panel. One of your panelists, Maria, actually worked with me at Comcast just recently. She was one of my go-to people for hiring, and she's really experienced in interviewing, and I know she's going to give great advice. So just wanted to give her a little shout out and a shout out for the panel. I'm excited for you all. And thanks, everybody.
Ooh, awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. So also wanted to give a shout out to our next event coming up. It is titled UX Specialization Conversations with the Community. If you've been in the field for a little while and you've been a generalist and you don't know where to go, or you have your eye on something, this is a great opportunity to get some one-on-one time with some specialists to ask them questions about their road into specialization and really sit down and have that conversation of how do you go from something general and knowledgeable to something very specific and knowledgeable. So keep an eye out on the social and for the registration announcement coming up soon. And now, without further ado, I will turn it back over to Ben Swofford to kick this party off.
All right, thanks, Ben. These are our awesome panelists. Our moderators, Phil from Think Company. Maria is a senior UX researcher at Spotify as of, I think, yesterday. Trip Odell, Chief Experience Officer at Habitat Logistics. Theresa Decker is the design manager at Think Company. Reggie Murphy is Director of Research at Twitter. So thank you all for being here. And Phil, give you the reins now.
Great. Hopefully everyone can hear me. If you hear a low rumble in the background, my neighbor who owns a 1970s muscle car just decided to start tuning the engine. So apologize for that. I can't do anything about it. It's a beautiful car, but he just pulled out of the driveway. He might pull up anytime soon. So I apologize for that noise in the background. As Ben mentioned, I've been this is now the third year that I've been facilitating this this panel session. It's really exciting for me. It's something that really addresses one of the many passions that I have about the UX industry, and that is, you know, a lot of folks gave me a chance to get into this industry a long time ago. I have a degree in English Lit and a degree in education, so why I'm in the design industry is a good question that people often ask, and it's because a lot of people gave me a chance, and so we're really looking for opportunities for other people to get that same kind of a chance when they start to enter the industry. So I'll get serious for a minute here. March 13th, 2020 is always going to be marked in history by two events that not only shook the US, but shook very likely the whole world. First off, a group of police officers broke down the door of Breonna Taylor's home and killed her. Tragically, this wasn't the first time, nor would it be the last time in US history that we would see a person of color senselessly lose their life. And while in too many cases, the wheels of justice remain frozen here around issues like that, the tragic loss of their lives have brought on a wave of protests and civil disobedience that hopefully have opened many eyes about racism and white supremacy. Action and awareness have spread throughout organizations large and small, and hopefully we are all beginning to institute changes in education and creating opportunities for everyone throughout the world. March 13th also marks the date that many organizations sent their employees home to work remotely for what we thought would be the first few weeks, just a few weeks, to let the pandemic pass. It's just going to happen, a few weeks. Weeks became months, months became quarters, and now it's been over a year, and the pandemic has taken many lives, and it's also dramatically changed the way we all work. But what hasn't changed in either of these cases is the momentum for the UX industry. There are more jobs being posted today than there were this time last year. People are still studying the craft on their own in boot camps and universities. And keep in mind, this industry is not brand new. I remember not too long ago meeting a human-computer interface engineer who was responsible for laying out dashboards for NASA spacecraft. When I tried to explain to what UX design was, he said, I've been doing what you've been doing for a long time for astronauts. And I had to take a pause and realize that, you know, we're doing something great, but it's not necessarily as new an industry as sometimes we think it is. Now, the new generation of UX designers, a lot of the folks, the 207 people that I see in the attendee list right now, you're going to be doing things in ways that UX designer and the rest of us could never have imagined. I know it. And the big challenge today is helping you find your way into the industry. So a lot has changed over the past year. A lot has stayed the same. And we've assembled this panel of experts who are involved in the hiring process in one way or another to share their insights to help you start your career or get into the UX industry for your first job. We also collected a lot of questions and concerns from you through the registration process. So without any further ado, let's go on to meet our panel. I want to share, let me share a slide here. Give me 1 second. Very simple slide to share. And I'm going to hand it off to Maria Cipollone, who's going to introduce herself and help answer our seed question is really, what single piece of advice can you give to someone who is just starting out or changing careers and may not have had that experience? Help them break into this industry. Maria.
Sure, absolutely. And beautiful pronunciation on my last name, Phil. You did it. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your time tonight. I am Maria Cipollone. I work for the Spotify organization, and that just started yesterday. As you heard, I spent close to 6 years at Comcast. I'm right now a senior UX researcher at Spotify. A single piece of advice that I can give you is really derived from what Phil was just talking about. Go and look at the listings for jobs in the particular domain that you're interested in, whether it's design, research, generalist, and take a look at some of the keywords that you see going on, key skills, key competencies. And I think what you'll find is that there's not a lot of specific skills, but there's more so a mindset of an individual that's being looked for. And I'm sure that if you do that little bit of research and also just sort of, look at the general resources available about UX online, you can figure out what the code switch is, right? And you can use that to sort of translate into the experiences and skills that you already have. I don't want to go too long, but I too, like Phil, didn't initially have the traditional background that you would expect. Certainly I am a social scientist at this point, but I could have done this even earlier on, knowing that some of the most important skills are, or really, abilities are storytelling, problem solving, right? And really finding ways to articulate those in your portfolio or resume is really important. So that's a piece of advice I could give.
That's great advice. Thank you, Maria. Let me switch over to, I think, Reggie, you're next alphabetically. So if you can just let us know your name, organization, title, and what single piece of advice would you give folks just starting out?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Phil. And I'd first just like to say thank you to the PhillyCHI organization. I'm honored to be amongst this panel and have the opportunity to share some thoughts with everyone. So thank you, PhillyCHI, and thank you just for the opportunity. So I'm Reggie Murphy, and I lead research at Twitter. I've been here almost a year, and previously I was at Vanguard, and before that I was at Facebook, and so I've spent quite some time being either leading research or managing teams in research. So I've spent my whole career doing this job that I love so much. So my advice is kind of like three things, especially if you're trying to make the transition or if you're just starting out. First is just making a plan. I mentor quite a few people, and that's the one thing that I try to get them to do is to sit down and let's make a plan first. So making a plan and then start making connections. So working LinkedIn like a boss, making connections, which will lead to more connections, and then making time to learn. So if you're starting out and trying to do something new, you've got to make time to learn the thing that you want to do. And so I tell people, as you're making that plan, set aside the time to, whether it's taking a new course, whether it's getting mentored by someone, or just, again, making time to make those connections, either via LinkedIn or a friend of a friend, all of those good things that will set you up for success. Thank you.
That's some great advice there, Reggie. Let me move over to Theresa. Theresa, why don't you introduce yourself and give us your single piece of advice?
Yeah, so I'm Theresa Decker. I'm a design manager at Think Company. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with Think, we're a user experience design consultancy located in Philadelphia. But we work with a wide variety of organizations across the country. We do a lot of different things for our clients, but I like to sort of sum it up by saying that we're often helping businesses simplify the complex. We're simplifying processes, structures, products, and just overall experiences for our clients. I started out as a designer at Think and moved into a design lead role, so leading projects, and then eventually became a design manager. So I've been fortunate to really grow and develop my career here at Think. And now as a manager, I manage people and also work on our internal design operations. So we've got a design team of about 60 designers, researchers, content strategists. So I have a handful of folks who I work closely with in a mentorship and guidance capacity, doing things like setting and tracking career goals, working through project challenges or successes, all that good stuff. Then I'm also working on internal strategic initiatives for the department, things like our education strategy, best practices, and also recruiting, of course. And also doing a lot of community outreach, which gets me to be involved in things like this, which I really love to do. And when it comes to breaking into UX, I would say my biggest piece of advice for you all is to find a mentor and try to make a personal, honest connection with them. Try to find someone who you can be your true vulnerable self with, someone who will help you to realize your strengths, help you identify a path to grow those strengths. And if that feels like too high a barrier, then even just finding someone who can help you get your foot into the door in an organization. As a hiring manager, we're naturally receiving a lot of applications from folks who may not have quite the right level of experience we need just yet for a certain position. But if someone here at Think has already made a connection with an applicant and is able to pass on a good word regarding the potential that they see in that person, or the drive that this person possesses, or the motivation that this person has to learn, then that is absolutely enough for us to say, hey, let's have a conversation. Maybe we don't have a project or role right now that this person could comfortably jump into and be successful in, but maybe down the road a bit, we would have the type of role that would support someone who needs to learn a bit more and slowly ease into the role. So yeah, just really being able to find folks to connect with that can help you meet other people and just be an advocate for you.
That's great. I feel like that's multiple upvotes for finding a mentor and just working with someone in the field. And I think that one of the great things about what we do is that most designers are really open to be mentors of someone. So definitely that's great advice. Let's move on to Trip. Trip. Last but not least, let us know who you are and what's your single piece of advice.
Oh, geez. So this is a tough crowd to follow. So a little bit about myself. I recently moved to Philadelphia from Seattle about 6 months ago, and until recently was Chief Experience Officer at Habitat. Leaning in on the pandemic trend, I recently accepted a role where I'm leading a team in London for Pearson Education, redefining one of their core global products to direct to consumer. So it's a big opportunity. As you said, a lot of companies are being transformed. And I think, the one thing that they never tell you about this business, like Reggie's have a plan. I had no plan. I ended up in this an accident. I started by accident. I started as a teacher on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, teaching media, and somehow found my way through graduate school, and then ended up, it's like the Forrest Gump story. I was at Adobe and Microsoft and Amazon doing interesting stuff. But, and the role has changed a lot. But one of the things I've discovered is you're always breaking in at every level of career, whether you're entry level and then what it takes to get from entry level to that mid level into the senior, into lead or manager or principal or executive. The job changes constantly. And I think, as Maria said, it's really ultimately about soft skills. People think, well, I need to be this unicorn. I need to know all of these things. So I think the most important advice I can give is to be relevant, is to find roles where you can have impact, even if it's on a voluntary basis, but it should be something that isn't theoretical. It's, working, showing where you can't really learn this stuff in a vacuum. It's problem solving. And so solve problems using the skill sets of a designer. and to connect with people, but to make good use of those mentoring. Like I get a lot of connection requests on LinkedIn. Most of them have no message. And I feel like a Pokemon. Everybody just wants to kind of like connect, and then there's nothing, right? There's no follow-up. It's when you actually want to connect with a mentor and somebody you want time from, like, have a plan for how you want to use that time. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Can you connect me with somebody, or do you know where I could look, or can you look at my portfolio? I think there's a lot you can do there.
That's awesome advice too. So I just want to summarize this just so anyone who's taken notes there, we've got, a big push for soft skills and recognizing that there's a lot more than just the hard skills that you may learn in any kind of program or boot camp. Make a plan, find mentors, really important stuff there to, think about how you want to approach this. I've mentored quite a few people who I've been watching them execute their plan, and it's great to watch them go through that, and as a mentor to give them feedback on those things. I love that. And then finally, this is great advice, Trip, because I feel this way all the time. Like, I think we all suffer from some form of imposter syndrome throughout our careers. So like, staying relevant and recognizing that you're always breaking in. I changed my career twice so far in my professional career. And even though I'm in a leadership position at Think Company now, I am constantly thinking to myself, like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And I'm reaching out to folks now. I have networks of people who run organizations that are similar to Think Company, where I reach out to them and ask them questions around, hey, how have you tackled this kind of a challenge in the past? So we're all always, if we're doing our jobs right, seeking out mentors and putting together a plan for that. So I think this is a great set of advice to set up the next phase of the conversation. And PhillyCHI did a great job. I want to thank everyone over there for taking, there hundreds of questions came in from registrants over the registration period for this. And they did a great synthesis of it. And there's a couple of categories of questions that we want to ask. And while I'm doing that, I want to remind people, you can post your questions in the Q&A tool. Be sure to read through the questions that are in the Q&A tool and upvote them. I want to give a special shout out to Laura from Uruguay, just because I see that she's from Uruguay, and I'm really excited that there's someone from Uruguay in our little webinar here. But do what Laura did, and post a question, upvote questions, and we'll get to those in the Q&A section.
Well, can I just interrupt you for 1 second before
Please.
we go on?
Yeah.
Just quickly, I know that we're all giving advice about having imposter syndrome and getting lucky. I just want to acknowledge that as a white person, getting lucky might mean something to someone else who's not. So I just want to acknowledge for everyone who's listening tonight that I am working on understanding what that means as a white person and rethinking how I approach who I give mentorship opportunities to and who I consider qualified, and how my unconscious biases, even just from a level of credentials, not only just racial identity or gender identity, tend to play into that, being aware of all those things. So I just want to promise the people listening tonight too that I think many of my colleagues are rethinking even how we think about who's qualified and how they're qualified.
Thank you for bringing up that point. I think that's an excellent point, and hopefully that resonates with a lot of the people that are on the call today. And I think that's an excellent point. The notion of networking is, it's a double-edged sword. It is important. Humans, as researchers know, people tend to cluster around people that are like us. And so if networking was the only way to do this, then we probably wouldn't be doing our jobs well. So we need to find ways to open our networks up to people who aren't like us, and make sure that there are opportunities available for everyone out there. And hopefully we'll be able to get to a question where we talk about how can we remove some of the other unconscious biases in our process.
If I can just add to that for a bit, because I think one of the things is it's really easy to say, we're choosing with I think there's a part of that where as leaders, it's a lot of things like go find a mentor or whatever. As leaders, I think I've been fortunate enough where I've fought for the ability to have apprentices, where you bring in because there's a lot of things that I don't care if you go to a boot camp or you go to graduate school, nothing is going to teach you how to do the job. You actually have to learn that by observing it. One thing, a lot of people will get hired into a role where they are the only designer and they have no mentorship or they have no one to actually apprentice with and model from. And that can really set a career back. So I think being very intentional about the organization you're going to and who you're working with and for is also, like, if you can afford to be choosy, you know, look for that opportunity where you're going to learn the most, not where you're going to make the most.
I think that's great advice as well. Does anybody have anything else?
Yeah, I want to just echo that comment, because as I have looked over the course of my career, I have been asked, because I mentioned earlier that I was at Facebook and then I left Facebook and went to Vanguard, and everybody thought, Reggie, what is wrong with you? They thought that I was doing well at Facebook, which I was. I actually left Facebook for family reasons, just because my kids are getting a little older. I wanted to spend more time with them, and I was managing 15 people across 4 teams, 8 time zones. So I made that decision because of that. But also, the reason why I bring on this point is, whenever I'm mentoring people, I tell them that you're going to have to make those tough decisions about where you want to work, but you want to make sure that where you work aligns with your personal aspirations, your views, your what you believe in. Because if you go chasing money, it's not going to work for you in the long run. That's not a sustainable approach to job hunting. You want to, and I mean, I'm enjoying Twitter because Twitter aligns with how I believe and what we're trying to do, which is help the public conversation and help people have better conversations and make more connections around the world. And I'm loving it. And so I would encourage you, as you start thinking about where you want to work, is to think about, because you're going to be happier, you're going to be much more successful, you're going to make more friends, and at the same time, hey, your compensation is going to match your feeling of being there. So I just wanted to echo everybody saying that.
That's great advice too, because I often tell folks that your job hunt is not just finding a place that's willing to hire you; it's finding a place where you want to work, where you want to be. And I think the past year has really brought a lot of change into organizations and how they're recruiting, or they want to change how they're recruiting. They're not sure how they're going to do it. So maybe the next question around that is, what of the 4 panelists, what has changed in the way that you or your organization is recruiting over the past year, either related to the renewed focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or in just this world that we're all living in, where, guess what, we're all dialing in. So I don't know if anybody wants to take it first and respond. Trip, it looks like you're raising your hand. You're muted still.
Sorry about that. So one of the things, actually I did this with a personal project, the podcast that I run, Brave New Workforce. We needed extra help, and I hired 2 people completely remotely for the summer. They were college interns. One person was in College Park, Maryland. The other one was in Boca Raton. Nobody ever met anyone, but we spent a lot of time in one-on-ones. And I was Jesuit educated, so there's a big sense of vocation and finding your way. And like Aristotle says, where your talents and the needs of the world meet, that's your vocation. And so trying to find that, what I call diamonds in the coal mine, is like looking purely at behavioral characteristics, openness to growth, that they're metacognition or critical thinking, and then having a backbone and a point of view about what they want to do. That is easier stuff to work with than if I know Sketch or if I know how to use the software. That stuff is learnable. Those other things are much harder to coach for. And so those are the things that I screened for exclusively. Everything else is learnable. And when you're looking at somebody, it's actually I call them diamonds and coal mines, because they just need to be polished. They just need to be, they're in plain sight. You need to give them a chance, and you need to take the responsibility as a leader to make your team better. That's your job. And I think finding people, meeting them where they're at is a big part of this, because you've got a much bigger coal mine now with the world and remote and everything else. There's so much more opportunity to take risks.
Yeah. So I want you to think about this. I'm going to hand it over to Maria in a second because she unmuted, but something in the back of your mind to answer next in that realm, Trip, is how do people find a way to stand out? Because a lot of questions here are, how do I get the attention of the hiring managers? So I'll let you chew on that for a second while Maria, I don't know what you were unmuting for, but you can answer the same question around that.
So I don't want anyone to think they're absolutely qualified. UX research is a little more challenging at times because it does require specific sets of skills. I'm sure design does too. But I think that, as you're applying for a position, you can, in a polite way, remind the hiring person that it is a time where we're rethinking our structures of power and privilege. And I know that as I left Comcast, that's what I was doing with my manager as we were looking to hire, was say, okay, how are we reproducing the same structures that got us, into an inequitable place in the first place? So it is, I say that to say it's a really opportune moment for diverse experiences. I'm sorry, my Mac is updating behind me. Hopefully you can't hear that. And so there's opportunity there to really think about that. That said, as far as UX research goes, and certainly design has this component, we care about stories. We want to see someone who has a sense of their narrative and where they've been and where they've come to and what they understand about the UX industry that makes them ready for that. I think most people on this call tonight are humble enough to know when they're not ready and they're not qualified. But certainly through mentorship, you can start to tell your story just as you develop a plan. And that's really what we want to hear. And just to reiterate, I think, it's an opportune time where really the onus has been on us to rethink what biases are playing out as we hire. So I know I'm really ready to consider a much more diverse set of experiences than had ever been considered before.
It's great to hear. I think there's a lot of people in our attendee list that will get some relief from that as well. Theresa and Reggie both have their hands up, but I think Theresa went first. So I'm going to go to her and then I'll go to Reggie. So Theresa, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, just to kind of speak back to the point of kind of just like looking for something particular in a portfolio. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but Maria was kind of hinting toward that a little bit as well. There are days where I'm reviewing a really, really large number of applicants. So at times things start to become like fairly repetitive, especially for, the more junior roles or the more mid-level roles where we receive a lot of applications from folks kind of new to the industry or have completed some sort of like recent UX training. So there tends to be a bit of a pattern in the way that the work is represented with specific like steps or deliverables. But like Maria was saying, like I'm typically looking for like a storyline. So when I'm starting to see that pattern, I'm tending to look for an added layer of clarity and purpose in the way that the story is being told. Like, can this person clearly tie the steps in their process back to the final product? Did they take what they learned from a certain step in the process or from a certain deliverable or task and apply that to the decisions that they made in their final designs? Was I able to see that connection clearly? Did they help me as the user of their portfolio kind of easily learn who they are and what they want and what they can do?
That's great advice. And I want to say this has come up every time we've done this panel and every time I've had conversations with hiring managers, is that the critical part of your portfolio is telling your story. And I know that there's a lot of folks out there who they fear showing the ugly side of the work that they've done. Like they won't show sketches from their notebooks or they won't show things like that because they think that what we are looking for are the pretty final results. And really, and I don't want to speak for everyone in this panel, so please object if I'm putting words in your mouth, but we want to see what your design journey was from the beginning of defining the problem all the way to the end where the pretty stuff lives. So I see a lot of nods there. I see your hand, Trip, but Reggie had his hand up a second ago, so I just want to make sure he gets his thoughts in.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Phil. Just plus oneing Trip, Maria, and Theresa on all of what they've said. I think what I want to share is, yes, the hard skills are important. Like for user experience researchers or researchers, there are certain things that it would be great to know coming through the door, or if you're just starting out, understanding the concept of usability testing, or understanding how to conduct a one-on-one interview, being curious, but the most important thing is being curious. And so some of the best interviewers that I know are just simply curious people. They may not have formal training, but they're just curious. So those are those soft skills. But one thing that over the past, I'd say, year, when I left Vanguard and now that I've joined Twitter, one of the things that we're really interested in is someone who's able to connect the dots, to come in and really talk about the product like they are the CEO of the company that owns the product, not simply as a researcher. So what you're doing is you're able to share from a researcher's point of view. Yeah, here's my point of view about, what we've learned. Here are the insights here, and be able to advocate for that position, but make the connection with, well, what if we make this change is going to happen to the product? How can we increase engagement? How can we decrease toxicity as it relates to, of course, social media? How can we decrease reporting, harassment reports, et cetera? Being able to connect it back to a business goal or objective is one of the things that I have seen as missing in many of the interactions that I've had with even experienced researchers. So if you're just getting into the business or making a transition, those are some key things to start thinking about, is how much can you immerse yourself into the product of where you're interviewing, so that when you are showing up, you really show up with some knowledge about the product. And yeah, maybe you're not as skilled from a research standpoint, but boy, you can show them with, what the product can be if you solve said problem.
I think that's great advice. And I'll give you one example from the last time Think Company ever trusted me to design anything. We were working for one of the world's largest payroll companies, and when I orient people towards that project today, and I tell that story, I say, this company cuts 1 out of every 5 paychecks in the US and 1 out of every 7 paychecks in the world. That's the first sentence that I give when I talk about the project that we did for them. And that, it has that storytelling aspect of it, of catching your attention, but also is like talking about the relevance of, wait a minute, this company's sitting on a statistically significant pile of data. What can we do with it? Which is really the design story around that challenge. And I think that, like, thinking about that as someone who's presenting your portfolio and talking to potential employers and thinking, how can I capture their attention? And also, it's not just the drama side of it, it's the relevance and the thinking like the owner of that company, like you were talking about, Reggie. Trip, you had your hand up, and I gave you a little homework too, so I'm hoping you could hit that too.
My dog ate it. What was the question again? Actually, what was the question? Because there were so many good things said by Maria and Reggie. But maybe I'll dovetail to it, because I think the one thing that's really important to understand, and don't believe the hype about UX and UX design, because it's actually it's a mutt of a discipline. It's not even one discipline. It's about 15 different disciplines. And where you work and the industry that you work in, or the nature of the business that you're in, whether it's a consultancy, whether it's an agency, whether it's a product company, shapes the way that works. And the leadership at that company shapes the role of design or research and how it's employed. So some companies gravitate towards more qualitative research methods. Some places gravitate towards more, like at Amazon, it was heavily quant, and they also had to do qual. So heavy data analysis. At design, there's the UX, UI, visual design, interaction design, voice design, all of these things, and everybody's trying to contort themselves around this. And it's important to understand that, like a lot of disciplines, whether it's medicine or it's things like even behavior, cognitive science, like economics, social sciences, psychology, like they all have different points of view and how the work is applied. So I think the more you understand about the culture you're trying to inject yourself into in a particular company, the more you can discover, like, the biases of the points of view. Like Microsoft loves pretty stuff. They love high fidelity. They don't like to work at like sketch level. And then I think the storytelling aspect to it. Well, and I don't care about sketches. Like I actually care about this. No. I was only there for 2 years, or not even. But I think there's a storytelling aspect to this as well, of like, know the story that you're trying to tell. And I think that's the point of view. You know, if the researchers are telling the story of who, the designer should be able to tell the story of why, and have that point of view and be able to tie that back to the who. And so I think that arc is super, super important.
So that's great. And I think we jumped over the original, not the original question that I asked, but the homework that I gave you. And I want to jump to that in a second, because I think you're giving great advice for once someone gets in front of the hiring manager. Now the question is, how do I get the attention of the organization? And keep in mind, many organizations have different layers of recruiting. So, you know, there's some companies that, you know, the hiring managers don't see resumes and portfolios until HR says, here's the stack of people that we pre-vetted for you. Look at these folks. So what kind of advice do the four of you have for the aspiring designer out there who feels like they're not making it through whatever that gateway is?
Never go through the gateway, like work around it. I mean, like the best jobs I've ever found, I networked directly to, and took risks. So if it's writing Medium posts, whether it is developing a point of view, you know, like there's ways where you can show your thinking, show your ideas. You know, if you use stuff like ADP List or Lunch Club or even Clubhouse or whatever, start a conversation with those people as if they're hiring managers but as human beings, right? Like try to find common ground, common interest, get them excited to talk to you. And there's ways to do that. Probably like more detail than we can get into here, but it's something that I never would have gotten into design if I had gone the typical route. Yep. Like nothing about me said design going into the field.
That's great advice. And if anyone's interested in some of the stuff that Trip is talking about, you might want to look up account-based marketing, because the same practices, you're just marketing yourself. So think about something like that. Reggie, you got your hand up. So what kind of advice do you have to get people's attention?
Oh, I love man, Trip. We need to hang out.
Get our voice together.
Absolutely. I saw this happen in real time. A designer they solved, I don't know if I can mention the exact problem, but they presented some work on Twitter that they were solving a problem for us about. And so they had the whole mock-up. I mean, it was in it had Figma file. I mean, Figma files, it was awesome. So they shared it and they tweeted a bunch of people on Twitter Design. Of course, our chief design officer saw it, and he's like, DM me. You know, and before you know it, you know, one thing leads to the next, and that person is working for Twitter now. They literally were bold enough to say, hey, Twitter, I see that you have a problem here that I am going to solve. I'm going to try to solve, and I'm going to show you how I'm solving it. And that was literally an interview that happened in real time. I mean, I was blown away. And I think that not only that can happen in a social media company, but that can happen at any company. If you're bold enough to say, hey, you know, and it could be on LinkedIn or it could be in whatever venue, but try it, especially if you're on the design side. I think it's, I mean, it can work. It can work for you.
That's great. That reminds me of the story which I saw unfold of the, I forget who it was, but it was an aspiring art director who wanted to work at a ad agency in New York City and couldn't get an interview, and then realized that the two partners that ran the agency are partners of an ad agency, so they're built of ego, and he took out a Google ad for their names. And so knowing that they probably Googled themselves at least once a week. And so when they Googled themselves, the ad came up saying like, hey, I've been trying to get an interview with your company, but this seems to be the only way to get your attention. And they hired him almost based solely on the fact that he was the only person in the world to ever figure that out. And then of course, everyone started doing it and people were like, nope, you don't win. Like someone already figured that out. So Maria, any other advice?
Yeah, and I don't want to talk over Theresa if she had something to add. I appreciate the stories. I think though I have to say that as someone who identifies as female, those are very ego-driven approaches, which are great. They're salesy. I think in the Twitter example, it's a little softer because you can show your skills without having to speak. But I think the thread there that's important is that, and a mentor of mine who I met through girls, one of the girls who code groups in Philly meetups, Anthony Gold told me, is that every job rec is looking to really solve a problem. And even if somebody left the position and that position's vacant, there's a problem there, much like Reggie's example with Twitter, there's a problem there. So if you get to talk to a recruiter, try and see if you can do a little bit of interviewing about what is the need that is needing to be fulfilled. In the case of Comcast, they're trying to hire, I know, a UX research manager. There's some very quick projects that are coming up. So they need somebody who can move quickly and manage projects, move fast, right? So trying to understand what the job is really asking for, not only will get you in that right position that Trip and Reggie were talking about, the one that really aligns with where you're at and what you need to be doing, but also you can begin to say, oh, well, then I've done that before. And the story that you tell to present yourself can show how you can solve that need. I just wanted to say quickly that not all that glitters is gold in this industry, not only who you work for, but what you look like. People look at my LinkedIn profile and think that it was like a no-brainer for me to get a UXR job. That is not the truth. They had no trust that an academic like me would understand how to make a product. Or be savvy enough or quick enough or any. So my story was, I understand products, I understand how to make things, and here's how. So it's really important, I think, to think of a job listing as someone has a need they need to solve. And if the job listing isn't well written, which let's face it, many aren't, try and get a conversation with a recruiter if you can, or do some sort of digging in the description to try and understand what kind of need needs to be solved for that position and that company. And of course, I'm happy to advise on that too.
That's great.
So-
If I can understand or think about the subtext of what you're saying here, it is, you may need to customize your resume. You may need to write custom cover letters. You may need to approach each job as if it's something new and individual. And that may help you get people's attention as well.
So maybe it's not that, because a lot of the same problems I think occur, and Reggie was talking about this, in our line of work, you need someone who can, it's almost a liberal arts perspective, to be honest with you. You need somebody who can connect dots and tell and say, oh, this relates to this and this meta narrative relates here, right? So even if you sort of tell that narrative about yourself, you might not need to change per job, but you might be able to identify the opportunities that are really looking for someone like that.
Yeah.
I noticed there's a posting right now, just quickly, and I'll be quiet, UX research analyst for Hulu. And I was like, someone there doesn't get UXR, because we wouldn't call it an analyst, right? Like that. And I'm happy to help advise on what I sort of see in the code of the job description. I'm like, somebody's quant there. And they're like, oh, we need this thing, right?
Yeah.
So those key terms can kind of tell you what sort of problem needs to be solved. And if you get a conversation with a recruiter, you might say, are you looking for someone who is more qualitative based, can tell narratives, understands how to visually tell a story? Or are you looking for an analyst? Because then you can decide which one you are.
That's great. That's great advice.
So if I can just because I think there's ways to do it. I think there's many ways to do it. And Maria, I totally see where you're coming from, but I think in my experience, some of the folks that I've been able to bring up. So at one of the startups I was at, I trained the receptionist to become a user researcher because she came to me and she's like, go to a she wanted to go to a boot camp and quit her job. I was like, don't do that. There's a great program at University of Washington that's part-time. And I fought with my CPO to get a 90-day internship. And it was like my butt on the line if it didn't work out as well. And she's been promoted twice, and she's about to graduate from the UW program, which is a top 5 program. Another guy in that same role was a high school dropout, but could code like a demon and just needed the shot. And so I think it's like identifying the right people, even getting in proximity and being relevant. Like there's so many things now with remote work, with the design operations, like the tools that we use to communicate, how we manage things like Airtable and Jira and all of these other tools. You get close, you get embedded, you get opportunity. There's always more design and research work that needs to be done. How do you get turns at bat, and get in there close to the work, because you're one step closer. It may not be one step, it could be a 2 or even a 3 step. But if you're resilient and you push, you seek out the right people, there's help to be had.
Yeah, that's great advice too. Theresa, you've been sitting there with your hand raised, so I just want to give you a chance to chime in here. You're muted though. You're on mute.
But of course, I was going to jump in and say something pretty similar to Maria. I don't identify as a bold person. Like I don't, kind of make those kind of moves. And it took me a while to find my confidence in our industry. And it took me, years of experience to find that kind of confidence level to do those types of things, or to make those bold moves. So I kind of want to just reiterate what I had said earlier, as a response to one of your first questions, Phil, like what I'm looking for in portfolios, like because there is so much repetition in the portfolios, one way to stand out is just to treat your portfolio as a product that someone is experiencing, and think of, the story that you're telling through the lens of the person that is receiving it. And make sure that you are targeting the right aspects of the roles that you are seeking out throughout that story, and do it in a really clear and concise way that is like digestible and, almost like adding some level of like too long didn't read, because there is like a lot of portfolios that we have to review on a daily basis. And so if there's a way to add some level of simplification in some way, it can go really, really far. And that's just like a small little piece of advice for the portfolio.
I think it's a great piece of advice. I mean, if you think about it, all of us in this industry, our job is to help people meet their needs in the most efficient, effective way that you possibly can. And so whether you're UX researcher, UX designer, whatever area you are, you have to think about the hiring manager and possibly the HR department, if you have to go through them, as your target audience, and design a portfolio and an approach to that organization that meets their needs. So I think that's great advice. It is really tough to get in through cold interviews, and I think that process is changing. And this goes to the I think one of the next questions that I want to ask, and Maria's sort of talked about this a little bit, but there may be inherent biases in the processes that we've all created. Like when we talk about your network, like my network, guess what? It's old white men. Look at me. How have you or your organizations, or what ideas do you all have for trying to remove those biases in your recruiting process? And I'm asking this because it may help other folks understand better ways that they can approach you.
One of the things and I think this goes for most companies now, but some companies do it better than others. But, and there's a whole bunch of literature around behavioral interviewing. And all of it is not created equal, but when done correctly, and when you are, when you're sort of weaving together the dimensions that you're looking for in a particular role, it can be very effective at sort of stripping away, doesn't matter who you are, is we want to understand how you respond to questions such as, tell me about a time when you have when something did not go well with your project and you needed to get things back on track with your cross-functional team, what was the problem? What did you do about it? Like, what was your action that helped get it back together? And then what was the final outcome? And some companies call that the star. You know, if you're able to deliver on that question in that way, you get a star. I think that that is the most effective way at eliminating bias. It is training all of the interviewers to conduct the interview that way. Like I said, all companies don't have that kind of structure and training, so it's hit or miss at some places that really are serious about it. But when I am coaching and trying to train the folks that are involved in my interview loops, we really try to dial into that particular type of questioning and probing in order to get an answer about your behavior, about your actions, and about the things that you're doing there, because nothing else then matters.
Yeah. So on the flip side, if we're talking about interview prep, then you should be preparing those stories ahead of time, so you're not sitting there mulling over what.
Absolutely. You can go on the internet and Google, you know, types of questions that tech companies ask UX researchers or designers, and you'll get a full list of behavioral, like, this is not a new thing. It's just how it's applied and how people use it is the big thing now. So yeah, you can just go online and Google, and you'll find a whole list of questions to prepare. But if you work with a mentor, they can help prioritize the ones that we hear or that we utilize more often.
I do coaching engagements on that. Like, that's the thing where you said start, situation, task, action, result. Like, what was the context? What was the thing you were supposed to do? What was the thing that you did? And then what was the outcome? And so it has to have that clean arc to it, and you can't sort of meander around. Amazon used it extensively. Like, I was on 250 plus loops where I was doing those. And they had a rubric that was very clear on their leadership principles. You know, one of my favorite go-tos was, tell me about your proudest failure, which is like, it was really, you're looking at like vocally self-critical, learn and be curious, like what was the thing that went wrong? What would you do differently? And that goes to the coachability and the self-awareness, and that's what you're looking for. But you're exactly right. But I think the one thing is that you really have to tailor that response. You have to give the googly answer, or the Amazonian answer, or the Twitter answer, or the Facebook answer, and at least sort of, as Maria said, code switch to know kind of the culture that you're talking to and what they value.
Can I just add? Yeah, I just want to add that is a very like a major tech company, and I get it. I've worked on both sides. I think at Comcast the approach was a little different. And Liz Kell was here. The Comcast sponsored the event. It's a great team there. It's a top-notch team. It's a small team, but high on rigor. So what we used to really ask about is to hear, you know, how individuals make decisions about standing on their core values when they know that, you know, there's pressures to sort of, you know, fold and and be a good team member. You know, how do you sort of position yourself, you know, when, you know, especially in terms of data collection, you know, there's a lot of people that want to suggest to you how to do the research, and there's a real tendency to want to be sort of, oh, okay, I'll go and do the study that way. I think we looked for curiosity in personal projects. I mean, we hired everyone from filmmakers to studio artists to physics majors. I mean, there was just someone, you know, any conversation where you can say, well, I started out with these questions, but then I found myself with these questions, that, you know, is a research design person who just keeps trying to get closer to the human experience. So again, that's why sharing those personal narratives of how you think and how you operate and how you don't just rest and accept something as okay, that's what someone told me to do. Oh, okay, well, that's just the answer to that question. I think also at the same way, I think for researchers, a good story to tell is when you went down what I call a dark hallway. And I don't know what the design equivalent of this is, but you started researching something that you thought was interesting and it revealed nothing, and you had to sort of pivot and turn around, and how you sort of dealt with that with your stakeholders and where you made mistakes there. But we were really looking at the individual and what the individual would bring sort of in the Comcast. I haven't done any interviewing for Spotify yet, so I don't know how they operate. But I think, I just say that and sort of push back on the sort of dominant tech companies way of doing it, not to be rude, only because I see people on here posting jobs for the city of Philadelphia. And we know that the social justice piece of UX doesn't mean that everybody's going to work at Spotify, right? I'm a pretty, privileged individual to have worked where I worked. And I know there's places where I could even make more impact outside of the monetization side. So for those people, thinking about them, how they might approach it, again, we were looking for a story about curiosity, a story about, as Tripp said, failure, stories about, ways that you don't just necessarily, I hate to say like cave in, but ways that you sort of stand your ground about what your ethics, values, and morals are.
That's great advice. And I think I'll get to you in 1 second, Reggie, but I want to throw it to Theresa for a second, just to ask, is there anything different in what you heard when you're considering hiring in an agency environment? So like we think about these as like two different big jobs. There's working in-house, which is in a large organization and being in an in-house team. And then there's the world that Theresa and I live in, which I know many of you have lived in this world, but Theresa's probably got the closest perspective.
Yeah. So great point. Like, because Think Company is a consultancy and we're working very closely with our clients, oftentimes, even embedded within their teams and even sometimes adapting to some parts of their culture. I look for strong communication skills and also flexibility, because we're forming relationships with our stakeholders, we're aligning on goals, or working through challenges, in a very collaborative way. So it's important for our team members to be strong communicators for sure. But it's also important for our folks to be flexible and willing to adapt with, constant shifting priorities, or to move work forward and progress through like unknowns. And I uncover these skills in a few different ways. Initially, I'm looking at the way they're talking through their strengths and their interests in their cover letter, as well as the way they're presenting their work in their portfolio. And then during phone interviews, I listen for how they discuss, overcoming challenges, or even their approach to collaboration, and really how they describe their team structures, and how they're working with people on their teams. That's often very, very telling of how they like to work on their day-to-day. And lastly, and this might be a bit of a controversial topic, we do have an exercise component to our hiring process. It's not spec work and it's not related to our client work in any way. It's really like a fictional prompt that's fairly open-ended and is essentially a way for us to see how our candidates think. I'm not going to go like too far into the details unless that's something we want to dig into in the Q&A. But it is an extremely effective way for us to identify the soft skills that are most important to our roles. And we're actually able to see strengths that don't really come out in the portfolio discussion. So we're actually uncovering things for people that they might not have uncovered for themselves. And we are also able to identify gaps that, could have been missed when simply reviewing the work. But yeah,
great.
It's a process.
Yeah. And I know there's a lot of challenges that folks have around exercise work for potential candidates, and we could probably have just an entire discussion around that. But I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that or share their thoughts about it. But
it is controversial.
Yeah, I've actually walked away from jobs that they wanted me to do an exercise for, or just flat out refused it. And now that's super privileged, and I'm old enough in my career where I can be like, I don't need to do that. Like full on. I just know like that's privilege, like in action. But I never use it in my own process. I use a process that I call the Kobayashi Maru, which is the unbeatable test from Star Trek, which is essentially you give them some data, you give them time to think through the problem, and you give them a prompt, and you give them 45 minutes to come up with something, like 45 minutes, an hour and a half. And then I come in and I bring in some Confederates and we just beat the hell out of it. And I move the goalposts, because that's what happens at product. Scope changes, products change, the research uncovers all sorts of stuff, and being able to show how they can think on their feet or where they're going to back off of something. I feel like that's a better sense of the kind of fungibility in the thinking you need and the kind of creativity versus giving somebody, like asking a candidate to spend, it's always 2 or 3 times as long. But if you say you shouldn't spend more than 12 hours on this, or you should only spend 2 hours, it's always time away from them and away from their family. I just don't like to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, I think everyone's trying to aim for the same thing. Like the way you described that, may seem a little hostile too, where it's like, but this is the environment that we all work in. Like it's our job to present things to stakeholders who very often want to challenge it, and we need to see what your reaction to being challenged is and how you justify your work. So that's the goal of all of us.
I think the other thing too is, like, I was at Amazon for 6 years and I affectionately called it Fight Club, right? Like it was more about, like, could you get somebody in there that not only were they going to be successful as a designer, we had brilliant designers that failed terribly at Amazon because the culture was was so tough. I had to make sure that they were okay to deal with the types of PMs that end up in there, and being able to, like, that's the culture fit part, is that you have to really tailor it to the culture they're coming into, because you don't want people you don't want to destroy somebody's confidence.
Yeah. So, and we're supposed to get to Q&A at 7:45. So we got 2 more minutes, but I want to give Reggie and Maria just one last chance to weigh in on this topic, and then we'll switch over to Q&A.
Just yeah, it's a very the exercises are controversial, and we spend literally a whole panel just on that. I've moved away from that approach. I just think that there is some bias that could go in, because who's the one that's pulling together the test, and because that can determine what that person taking the test believes and things like that. So, but anyway, I won't debate that tonight. I did want to mention, because you were talking about just different types of approaches to interviewing, or what candidates can expect. One thing at Twitter that we really try to explore with candidates is growth mindset. Do you have an intention to leave something better when you left, better than you found it when you leave? Can you look around the corner at the bigger picture? Like, okay, you've achieved this, so now what's next? Can you see something bigger and better? Like, I think that understanding that about a company, and if they're interested in that, and learning how to talk to that, because we ask, I know this is a weird question, but we do ask, hey, what is your thing? What is your superpower? What is the thing that that you are number one in, and you can talk, because that person then feels like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I can talk about myself. I can talk about this thing that I can do. Yeah. And it really helps the conversation. It just helps the interview process when you can talk about your superpower, because it's not like we want to train you to do something that you can't do. We love for you to do that thing that you're awesome at day one. So tell us about it in your interview.
That, and I'm going to hand it to you, Maria, for the last word, but I just want to add to this, like, any opportunity you as an interviewee have to get passionate about what you're doing, like talking about your superpower, like, there's nothing more compelling during an interview than your passion. And if you're putting it on, if it's fake, it's very obvious. If you just get excited about something, every hiring manager is going to see that, and it's going to shine through, and they're going to get excited about bringing you on board. So think about what that is and how you can steer the conversation in that direction. And Maria, you got the last word before we go to
I'm so
Q&A.
Thank you. 2 things. So I just did homework for my job. So maybe we need to have a panel with those that have hiring power and I'll be an attendee, and we can ask these powers that be why they're still continuing these processes, because that homework was hard and I only had an hour to do it. And I don't know if y'all know, but Spotify is based in Sweden, so I had to wake up real early to do that homework. So I'm still doing homework. I'm still interviewing. One of the things I want to say that, yeah, I'm 41 years old now, and I took lumps interviewing again just now. It's hard. I'm looking at a lot of comments about vulnerability. So two things. Sometimes in an interview, you'll get asked a question that it's okay to get wrong and fumble and say, is that what you, they, especially in research, and I imagine in design, want to hear you think through. So it's okay to don't worry so much. And I'm being a hypocrite here because I would get off the phone and be like, oh my God, I messed that up so bad. But not necessarily the case. The desire is so don't be too hard on yourself. But clearly with all our discussions, obviously in the chat on the side about vulnerability and one story, I think the first thing is probably to do your plan, like Reggie said, and I would always listen to everything Reggie says, do your plan, but also then next, like maybe a little journaling about who are you and what is your story, you know, and it sounds like that's a first good direction.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess I'll sum up some of your advice here in that, like, I do a lot of talking. I do a lot of pitching for the company. I do a lot of public speaking, things like that. Before, when I was driving to work on a regular basis, I would practice in the car. I would talk to myself. People probably, before the age of cell phones, people thought I was crazy just riding in a car by myself, talking to myself. So, but practicing that stuff and getting it out there and just like starting to get comfortable in your own skin, talking about yourself is something that's really important. And on the exercise topic, I'll mention that I spent the early part of my career trying really desperately to get IDEO to hire me. I thought that was the place that I wanted to be and I wanted to work. They had an exercise that I did actually 3 times during the interview process, 3 separate times. The third time, I'm sorry, the first time that they called me in, I had done an exercise when they first installed kiosks at Wawa's. If you're in the Philadelphia area, you know what a Wawa is. It's a convenience store. They installed kiosks. And I did an exercise to change the floor plan of a Wawa based on my observation for 3 days of taking notes because the kiosks messed up the traffic flow in the Wawa. And they called me back to do a presentation on it. When I did the presentation at the end, I said, what was it about my original exercise that I sent you that made you want to talk to me? And they said, we didn't know what the hell a Wawa was. So who knows what's going to get their attention? They were all just interested. They Googled it. Like, it was still in the early ages of Google. They were able to find out what a Wawa was, but they were like, well, that got our attention. We might as well talk to this joker. And well, they never hired me. So here I am. Okay, let's go into Q&A. I haven't really been monitoring the Q&A channel because I've been so enamored by the conversation, but I'm just going to go to the most upvoted things. If we've answered the question, I might pass on it. Sometimes we unmute the phone, but we have 25 minutes to get through a lot of questions. So I think I'm just going to ask the questions for folks. Jason Wong has asked, what should be in your career plan? You know, how do you make a plan? So that's a good question. Like, what, Reggie, you're the one, I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah.
Because you said make a plan. So let us know what's in the plan.
Well, so what is your, first you start off with, what is your ultimate goal? Let's say your goal is you want to, I'm working with a mentee right now, and this mentee is making the transition from academia to the industry. They've been a professor for a few years, and they've decided, hey, I'd like to score a job working as a user experience researcher at a company. So that is the ultimate goal. So what are the steps that you need to do in order to get there? So we've been working out of plan. Well, we discovered that there were some courses that would be beneficial in improving this person's skill set. Usability testing, card sorting, like very specific UX research skills would round out this person's portfolio in terms of a skill set. And we talked about what we've just been talking about here. What are interviewing types of questions that we could do some role playing? So that may be another point down the line where we'll do some role play as another point in the process. Number 3, maybe part of the goal is, okay, well, what should my portfolio look like? So depending on what your goal is that's just sort of how you start to plan. I'm a very practical, pragmatic person. So I'm like, hey, what are the nuts and bolts? A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, write it out. And once it's down on paper, you are more likely to hold yourself accountable to it. And you put dates you put times, you put specifics down. That's how you start off with the plan. I hope that helps.
I think that's great advice. And
please build on that.
one thing that was very clear in your plan is that you're working on this plan with someone else. You know, that there's someone who can do mock interviews with you, that you can,
Especially if you're
it could be a
starting
mentor,
out.
it could be a friend, you know.
Yeah, especially if you're starting out, you don't have a lot of experience, and it helps to connect with somebody who can tutor you.
That's great. Trip, you had your hand up, so.
I think a lot of times design's one of those words like smurf. It can be a noun, a verb, an adjective, you know. I think if you can talk about your North Star goals without using the word design or research. So I use technology to make life a little easier for people. Or I save children from preventable diseases working in Africa, you know, from getting more people to immunize, right? Like those sorts of things where if you can connect what you want to do with the impact in the world you want to have without falling back to a job title or the things the tactics, what is the strategy? What is your vision for what you want to accomplish in the world? And be able to define that without using Smurf words. It helps to get your focus, because then the tactics and the strategy to get there become a little bit more apparent.
That's great. That's good advice. Okay, so Theresa Lawrence, this next question is the big question. And this will be another controversial topic, but she's asking for early UX career people or those transitioning to UX. Does it make more sense to frame yourself as a generalist or go ahead and really focus on a niche like UX writing or UX research? I feel like my job search is all over the place and narrowing it down might help, but I don't want to rule anything out. So I'm going to open the floor to the eternal question of, should you be a generalist or should you be a specialist when you're just starting out your career? Maria, you're nodding your head vigorously, so I think I'm going to let you answer first.
God, I was hoping Theresa would know, but I feel like Theresa knows better. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to let Theresa answer because she probably does know better. As an academic, I probably carry the bias of being a specialist because we come from a highly specialized culture. So maybe that's a cool clue if the hiring manager has a PhD, be like, oh, this person wants special. I don't know. I'm just sharing my bias.
Theresa, what do you think?
Yeah, I think eventually specializing in something makes a lot of sense, especially if that's what you're most interested in. But, you know, just seeing in the question that this is targeted for people transitioning into UX, I feel like you're going to get that specialization on the job. And so I think it'd be actually really hard to start specializing, you know, from the get-go. So I would imagine, you know, going fairly generalized in the beginning and starting to get some experience under your belt. And, you know, in the interview process, being very clear about your interest in those certain specializations. Like I know, you know, in my experience hiring for Think Company, I love it when someone says that they are interested in research but don't know a lot about it yet, but want to move in that direction. Then we know that we can help train that person and help them follow that passion. Same thing for like content strategy or UX writing. You know, when we hear that someone is interested in those things, that definitely helps them stand out. And that definitely, you know, is like a trigger for us to, you know, want to work with someone who has, you know, interest in specialized areas of design.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm just going to chime in before we move on to the next question. Boy, it just depends on the organization that you're looking at as well. I will tell you, small organizations very often need like hyper generalists because they're just, everyone's got to do a little bit of everything. Large organizations often have a lot more tolerance for specialists, but it's hard. Like you know, Reggie and Maria, like, I mean, people just getting out of school, pulling them in as a UX researcher might be really difficult. Like you kind of want them to have a little bit of experience doing something else first. I'm putting words in your mouth. I presume that that's a little bit of the perspective you may have though.
Reggie probably has better advice as far as how to get that and how he hires for that. I have good advice that all my friends who were developing apps and anybody who was small nonprofits who were developing apps, I volunteered to do usability for them. I used, samples of their employees so it wasn't dangerous or didn't violate any consent. Like if you can practice, you can get practice. And if you've gone to graduate school already or been through academia, usability and the research practices are not going to be like totally foreign to you. In fact, you're gonna be like, oh, this is pretty lightweight.
Absolutely. I tell people who are just now getting into the research business, I mentioned this earlier, just being curious, being someone who is just excited about learning about people. We are in the human exploration business. We are trying to see the world as they see it. And that's, if you, at the core, in terms of, job skills, if you have that, hey, we got something to work with. And then we can show you places where you can grow and learn other really more specific skills. Using usertesting.com or using some of these other platforms or Qualtrics or something like that. But being super curious, and I love interviewing people who have who enjoy like investigative shows, those kinds of things. Like, to me, if you have that kind of mind, it's like you love that kind of stuff, espionage and spy stuff. Like if that's your game, then you can be a researcher. But it's not a requirement, but it's also it's a nice attribute.
I want people that are broken combs. So like figuring out, like you're developing those skill sets over time, and I think I linked to the Peter Merholtz's job leveling framework, where you look at the career progression and the hard skills, and in entry level, you're looking for strong and maybe competent in two others. And then, developing to like a killer one or two skill sets. And that's how I build out my teams, is so that they interlock and that there's compounding value. Like a designer that can run their own sort of guerrilla research in a fast prototype test iteration. When you're building a product and you need to get something out the door, you don't have time for and you may not be resourced with a researcher. So, but I think like understanding what your salient core skill set is and building on that. Like if you're a UI person and you can do prototyping, that's killer, and that's what you want to focus on. You don't want to also be an amazing researcher and an amazing visual designer, because you're probably none of them, right?
Yeah.
Really good at one thing coming in the door, but if your career switchers in the audience, you've already switched once, right? Like adding a couple of skill sets to your design and research toolkit is a lot easier than trying to completely switch domains.
Yep. And that, I think that touches on the concept of the T-shaped designer that some people talk about. Like you sort of have to have an understanding and appreciation, a little bit of practice in many fields, but there's one thing that you might specialize in that's your superpower, as Reggie's referred to. I'm sorry, Marie, I talked over you a little bit.
No, it's okay. It's so hard with this format to like give the appropriate cue. I just wanted to say, you hear Tripp saying again that the narrative is so important. I mean, for whoever is listening, for our audience, if it is just for money, I would say go into being a PM. But if you've picked UX, you already have this story. You already saw and knew why it felt right to you. So that data should be implicit in you. We keep hammering on this story. What's your story? Don't think of something that you have to reinvent. You already know why this appealed to you and why you're a natural fit, or you wouldn't be interested.
I do want to jump in on that a bit about just specialist journal school. I don't think I shared my point of view. I'm in Maria's camp. Specializing is the way to go when you're first starting out, because at some point you might reach a moment where let's say if you start out as sort of a hybrid, you may reach a moment where you're going to have to work for a company that, well, there is no hybrid role. Like you want to work somewhere, but hey, there is design and then there is research. And I have to say, in tech, it's kind of like that. At more agency work, you find roles that are a little bit where you do a little bit of both. But I would have to say if you want a career more or less in a technology space, it's going to be important to specialize, because that's what we're looking for. When I don't see a whole lot of roles where it's sort of a hybrid type of scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, so I'm feeling so much anxiety because we have 45 questions. We have 9 minutes left, so we're not going to get to all the questions.
But afterwards.
But yeah, we've got the Twitter Spaces going on afterwards, and there's one point that I wanted to make, but my blood sugar's low and I'm forgetting what was coming to mind, so I'm gonna drop that. I'm gonna go to the next question though, which is probably the last question that we're gonna hit. Daniel Price is asking regarding LinkedIn relationships after a cold call, soft sell, shouldn't the mentor-mentee relationship be two-way? Beyond asking for help and then following through, what should that relationship look like? So I think what he's getting at is like, how do we make this mentor-mentee relationship something that's valuable on both sides? I don't know if anybody has any.
I spent a lot of time doing this, so I have a bit of perspective. I'm only one person, and so all of us who are in this profession, we're creating time and space to mentor. And I don't like to say it like this, but it is almost like a first come, first serve type of scenario, because we only have so much time. And hey, if you want to work with me, I want to work with you. I want to help. And people who work with me right now understand that. I build a Calendly, I use Calendly, and I have times each week that I have a 30-minute slot. And so there's sort of a scarcity of time, but what you want to try to do as a mentee is, hey, be motivated. We create a Google Doc together, we share it, and we go over things each time. That's helpful. So I think as much, I just love to see the motivation, and then I am happy to try if I'm available to help. And if I don't have time, I'm very transparent about my time. And I don't know if those of you who do mentoring, if you do it the same way, but it's a relationship. Don't overthink it. Just be you, ask for help. And if someone is available to help, they'll help. If not, then, maybe they don't have time, and they'll share that with you and say, hey, no, now's not a good time. And you can, maybe they can offer you someone else who might have time. Because I always do that. I say, hey, look, my schedule is really tight right now, but now I have, all these friends now on this panel. And I can say, hey, go triple deal, go hang out. Reach out to Trip, reach out to Theresa.
Closing my Twitter.
Only if you give me permission, Trip.
I think that's great advice. And I know there's at least 2 people in the audience that I've mentored in the past, and I want to apologize to them because I never really followed a very formulaic plan to mentoring them. So I don't think I did them well, but they're brilliant people, and I hope I didn't do them any damage. But Theresa, you were nodding your head. I didn't know if you had any other.
Yeah, to echo everything that Reggie said, like we are, just people, just like the people that we are mentoring, right? So we only have a certain amount of time to be able to dedicate to spending with others. And but I do think like one thing that is very helpful that I've experienced, when maybe I do have a little bit too much on my plate, is just like clear goals for the relationship or for the time spent together, rather than, reaching out with like a bunch of different questions that you might want to have your mentor address. Really just focusing on one thing and saying like, can we have a conversation about X for 30 minutes? And just kind of like putting a time stamp around it. And, then having like action items after that, and maybe the action item is you are going to reach out to this mentor again in 1 month for another similar type of interaction or meeting or conversation.
That's great.
I think also allowing the mentor to set sort of the boundaries around it, because like there's a lot of people that reach out for mentoring that like they want to bring a problem to you for you to solve for them. And like there's a detachment as a mentor. It's not like being a coach where I'm like invested in the outcome to help make you successful. It's that, there's a as a mentor, I want to see the best for you as a person, but I need to be emotionally detached from the outcome. And if you want to just come back and complain, or you haven't sort of taken action or whatever, like, my level of investment is going to fall off, because I have 3 children and a wife who is very, like, jealous of my time that I spent. Like, I find it intrinsically rewarding, because I'm a former teacher. I love teaching. I love coaching. I take joy in seeing people succeed, but not when I feel like my time is being wasted. And so if you're going to take action, and, they may say, I can't do that for you, or I can't spend 2 hours with you working on your portfolio. I'll give you some high level notes, and I can record it and I can share it out to you, but this is as much time as I can give to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of constantly messaging them or whatever. After a while, it becomes kind of burdensome, and it's on the mentor then to say, don't contact me anymore. And I never want to do that. Right. But it's something where you kind of have to gut it through. It's hard.
I agree. If we're mentoring, we love coaching, we love teaching. And tell a quick story. I had a mentee reach out. I had a few conversations with them prior, but they recently got a job offer, and they weren't really happy about it. And so when she reached out, she said, I'm just not happy about this offer. Can you help me? So it was a very specific conversation that we had around negotiating. And I feel like that's my superpower. So I was dialing in. I was doing the Sheryl Sandberg. I was helping her lean in. I was doing all of it, and I was feeling really good about the advice. And it made me feel good when she reached back out and said, hey, I took your advice. I got more money. I got a bonus. I got this. So us who are mentoring, we want to see you succeed. I love when Tripp said that, because we want to see you succeed. So when you come to us with something very specific, we're naturally problem solvers, and we're going to try to help you.
That's great. I'd love to give, because we're 2 minutes in, but I'd love to give some advice to those mentees, and that is, eventually, when you become successful in this career, you need to give it back. Just like everyone on this panel, gives it back when they mentor other folks and give, as Tripp really eloquently put, like, we have people in our lives that are jockeying for our time and jealous of the time that we give away to others, and we do it because we're passionate about the industry. We want to give back. We want to power. We want people with superpowers populating the world, or populating this industry. So, but just remember, it's your duty to give it back once it's helped you out. Maria, I'm going to give you the last word again, because you were nodding your head. I didn't know if you had other thoughts on the mentor-menteeship, and we're not going to get to the other 46 questions, and I apologize for that. We're going to talk about getting into Twitter Spaces too.
So I make specific calls on my LinkedIn about who I'm looking to mentor. In specific, I've been really trying to mentor specific types of researchers that I think need an opportunity to be in the space. But one thing I do when I have a mentor call that it may be befuddling, but I just want to tell people why I do it, is I often describe the culture of where we work. Especially, I've mostly been in tech, and I've been a spoiled brat to have gone from video games to cable TV to music. So I often end up really giving a good cultural glimpse of the thinking that goes on inside of my organization. So when someone pushes back and says, well, how do I position myself? That's normally when you don't get a response back from me, because that's where your skill sets come in. And I think Tripp, Reggie, and Theresa were hitting on that, is that, I'm trying to give you a glimpse into the way this game really works, because of course it works a lot differently. And I just want to reiterate that, because yes, it is a challenge. I certainly have hired very high quality people that I was excited to work with, but it's a game like everything else, and it has rules, and there's some smoke and mirrors there. So you'll hear me talk a lot about what that means and how to navigate that.
I think that's great final advice. I want to thank you all, and I want to apologize to everyone who attended, and the 46 people who asked questions that we didn't get around to answering. it's a real challenge to, to be able to get through all that stuff. But we do have the after party coming up, which I'm gonna let me just share really quickly, in case you want to understand a little bit more about how this is going to work. Get into Twitter on your Android or iPhone. You need to make sure that you follow @Reggie Murphy. And if you do that and you're on your home screen on Twitter, then you will notice that you'll have a bubble with Reggie's face in it. And when it turns purple, you can tap into that, and then we can all experiment with Twitter Spaces and see how that works out and how we can continue the conversation over there. I don't want people to leave yet because I think PhillyCHI has some more business, but I do want to thank the panelists. I know that we've recorded this, and I know that PhillyCHI will find a way to post this so that other folks can benefit from it. I think we'll be able to send out, we've compiled some resources together as a group when we were planning this. And I think that's going to go out in an email from PhillyCHI as well to all the people who attended or signed up and couldn't make it. This has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I think I'm going to be a better mentor moving forward to folks. And I appreciate everyone on the panel who just shared some great insights for everyone. Let me hand it over to the PhillyCHI folks. I think, Ben, are you going to take over?
Hey, thanks, Phil. And thank you, everybody. This has been such an amazing conversation. I hope you're seeing all the virtual applause you're getting in the chat right now. Yeah, thanks for sticking around. We have raffle prizes. So Raeesha, if you're ready.
Yep.
Let me pull up our slides here. I try to share the screen without accidentally ending the meeting or something stupid like that.
So raffle prizes, we have 3 winners for our raffle, and we'll follow up by email and also send you the physical copy of the book, no matter where you are in the world. But a heads up, it might take little time than usual because of COVID. So the first book, which is Build Better Product, it goes to Amanda Enwin. The second one is Why We Fail, and that goes to Xiomara L. And the third one is Service Design, which goes to Jason Wong. So, and we will reach out to you via email to coordinate the delivery of your prize. And I'll pass it to Ben to wrap up.
All right, thanks, Raeesha, and congrats on your house today, by the way.
Thank you.
All right, so as Phil explained, we will have a Twitter Spaces experience hosted by Reggie Murphy. So please join us in about 10 minutes. We'll kick that off. Finally, I just want to say thank you one more time to our panel, to Phil for being an awesome moderator, our sponsors, Comcast XD, our event sponsor, and all our annual sponsors, and all the attendees for making this an amazing experience. We couldn't do it without all of you. So with that, join us on Spaces in a few minutes, but that wraps it up. So please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.